Welcome to Craving the Heat, where desire takes the lead and every story leaves you wanting more. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments and keep up with our latest naughty stories. I never expected the quiet evening to turn into something that would shake the foundation of my life. My wife had invited her daughter, Lily, to spend the weekend at our house while she was out of town on a business trip. Lily was older now, 19, a delicate stage of youth where independence clashes with lingering familiarity. She had grown into a smart, confident woman, and as a stepfather, I had always felt a mix of admiration and responsibility, but nothing beyond the boundaries of what was appropriate. That night, the house was quiet. I poured myself a glass of wine and settled into the living room with the latest book I'd been trying to finish. I thought I was alone, the hum of the heater and the muted sound of the city beyond the windows providing comfort. But then Lily appeared, asking if she could use the living room for some of her homework. I nodded, smiling, trying not to appear flustered by her presence. We sat in the same room, each absorbed in our tasks, when the first subtle tension began to build. Conversations that had always been casual now carried a strange weight, a closeness I hadn't anticipated. She laughed at my jokes a little longer than necessary, and I noticed the way her eyes lingered not inappropriately, but with a kind of emotional intensity that made me hyper-aware of every movement. Hours passed, and we were the last to awake. I found myself talking to her more than I intended, sharing stories from my past, small personal confessions I wouldn't have shared with anyone else. She listened, engaged, thoughtful. It was harmless, or so I told myself, but there was an undeniable undercurrent of intimacy that felt charged, dangerous in its subtlety. When she excused herself to go to bed, I felt a pang of emptiness, a strange longing I couldn't define. The house was silent again, but my mind was anything but calm. I had crossed some invisible threshold, not physically, but emotionally, and it terrified me. That night, I lay awake thinking about how quickly trust and propriety could unravel if emotions were left unchecked. The following days became a delicate, balancing act. I found myself thinking about her more than I should, worrying about her reactions, noticing details I would have ignored before. The tilt of her head, the way she smiled at me, the casual brush of her hand against mine. At the same time, I tried desperately to maintain boundaries. I reminded myself that she was my stepdaughter, my family in a way, and that any misstep could destroy relationships permanently. But life has a way of complicating even the best intentions. My wife returned that weekend, and the tension I had felt dissipated, or at least I tried to convince myself it had. Yet the seed had been planted. For weeks afterward, every interaction with Lily carried a subtle charge. I caught myself lingering in conversation, finding excuses to be near her, feeling a rush of concern or pride that went beyond what was strictly appropriate. Everything came to a head. One evening when my wife invited a friend over for dinner, Lily stayed in the living room, ostensibly working on a project, but I noticed her watching us from across the room. The friend left, the house settled into quiet again, and we ended up talking alone. The conversation turned personal once more, and the emotions we had tried to ignore surfaced in ways that felt overwhelming. We laughed, shared frustrations, and for a moment, I felt a connection that was intoxicating and dangerous all at once. Realized with a cold clarity that the boundary I had thought unbreakable had shifted. Not physically, but emotionally, in ways that could be just as damaging. The intensity of connection, the way we understood each other without words, was something I had never anticipated. I knew that if I let it continue, it could destroy not only my marriage, but the trust and family structure that had taken years to build. That night, I made a choice. I stepped back, forced distance where none had existed before. I apologized internally to myself for letting the emotional intimacy drift into forbidden territory. Over the coming months, I focused on restoring balance, channeling energy into my marriage, work, and personal growth. Lily, of course, remained blissfully unaware of the tension I had felt, and I worked hard to keep our interactions firmly appropriate. Looking back years later, I realized that the danger wasn't in desire, it was an emotional entanglement. in the subtle way boundaries can erode if one isn't vigilant. The experience left me hyper aware of the fragility of trust, the power of temptation, and the responsibility that comes with caring for someone who is family, even if not by blood. It taught me lessons about restraint, integrity, and the complexity of human relationships. Even now, in quiet moments, I sometimes think of that night not with longing, but with the stark understanding of how close I had come to crossing a line I could never undo. It serves as a constant reminder that emotional boundaries are just as important as physical ones, and that love, loyalty, and responsibility often demand vigilance far beyond what we anticipate. The days after that night were a delicate dance of careful distance and quiet observation. I kept myself busy, throwing long hours into work, errands, and even small hobbies I'd neglected over the years. Yet, no matter how occupied I became, Lily's presence lingered at the edges of my mind. She moved through the house with the same confidence and ease, unaware of the turbulence beneath the surface, and I felt a pang of guilt each time I noticed myself observing her more closely than I should doubt at first. I tried rationalizing my feelings, telling myself that the intensity of our conversations was natural, that we were simply two people who understood one another. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. There was an emotional closeness forming between us, one built on shared moments, mutual understanding, and subtle, unspoken tension. Every laugh, every glance, every quiet word exchanged in the hallways carried a weight I could not ignore. I found myself walking a tightrope. On one side was the life I had built, my marriage, my responsibilities, and the trust of a family that depended on me. On the other side was the pull of an emotional connection that had the power to unravel everything. I had never imagined that something as seemingly harmless as conversation could feel so dangerously intimate. Each day, I rehearsed boundaries, in my mind reminding myself to keep our interactions polite, measured, and entirely appropriate. But boundaries are fragile and human emotion is stubborn. One evening, Lily asked me to help with a project she'd been struggling with a presentation for her university course. I agreed, telling myself it was simply guidance, the same kind of support any adult would provide. She spread her papers across the dining table, and as we leaned over her work together, I could feel a tension in the air that was almost tangible. Our hands brushed more than once, fleeting touches that made my pulse quicken, and for a moment I had to step back and remind myself where the line was drawn as weeks passed. These moments accumulated, each one building a quiet storm beneath the surface. She confided small worries, frustrations with school, friendships, and future plans. I listened, offering advice where appropriate, but always careful not to let my own emotions show too clearly. It was exhausting maintaining such strict control. While feeling an emotional current that seemed to tug at me with increasing force, the turning point came unexpectedly, during a weekend when my wife was away on a work trip. Lily had invited a few friends over, and I stayed in the living room, ostensibly reading, while she and her friends chatted and laughed in the kitchen. At one point, the others stepped outside for a walk, leaving Lily and me alone. The quiet stretched between us, heavy and charged, and for a moment, I caught myself lost in her gaze. She was talking about something trivial, yet the way she looked at me, the intensity of her attention, made it impossible to focus on the words. I excused myself under the pretense of checking on a task in the other room, but even then my thoughts refused to settle. The emotional closeness had grown into something I could no longer deny not desire in its conventional sense, but a need for connection, understanding, and recognition that had gone far beyond casual conversation. I realized that the line I had sworn to never cross had already shifted, not in action, but in feeling. In the weeks that followed, I became hyper-aware of every interaction. A casual brush of her hand on the counter, a lingering glance across the room, a soft laugh each triggered a mixture of guilt, fascination, and restraint. I began journaling privately, trying to make sense of my emotions and the increasingly complex dynamics at home. Writing became a safe outlet, a place where I could acknowledge the intensity of our connection without acting on it or betraying anyone. One night, after a long day of work, I returned home to find Lily still awake, quietly reading in the living room. We spoke briefly about her studies, her plans for the coming semester, and her aspirations. It was ordinary conversation, yet the undercurrent of closeness was undeniable. She thanked me for my guidance and support, and I felt a rush of both pride and anxiety. The intimacy we shared was no longer something I could ignore, but I knew I had to remain vigilant, to guard against letting it evolve into something destructive. Months passed like this, a constant balancing act of closeness and restraint. I became more mindful of my own behavior, learning to navigate the tension without letting it spill over into inappropriate territory. I worked harder to strengthen my marriage, communicating more openly with my wife and investing in shared experiences. I also encouraged Lily to develop her independence, to pursue opportunities and friendships outside the household, recognizing that distance and boundaries were essential for all of us. Eventually, the intensity began to ease, not because the connection disappeared, but because I learned to integrate it safely into my life. The thrill of emotional proximity gave way to a quiet respect, a recognition of the fragile boundaries we must honor. I could still admire her intelligence, her humor, her warmth, without allowing it to threaten the family I loved. Years later, I look back on that period with a mixture of relief and reflection. The emotional closeness with Lily had tested my self-control and my understanding of human boundaries, but it had also taught me invaluable lessons about empathy, restraint, and the complexity of blended family dynamics. It reminded me that relationships, even those with the best intentions, require constant awareness, honesty, and respect for limits. The memory of that time lingers quietly, like a shadow on the edge of recollection, not a source of shame, but a reminder of how easily emotions can grow in unexpected ways, and how necessary it is to navigate them responsibly. It shaped the way I approached every relationship thereafter, grounding me in integrity, awareness, and the understanding that emotional intimacy must always be balanced with respect, trust, and care for those we hold dear. The years that followed were an intricate weave of ordinary family life and the quiet undercurrent of tension I had learned to control. Lily grew into her late teens, her personality blossoming with confidence, humor, and a subtle independence that often reminded me of the days when our conversations had felt so electric. I continued to support her, helping with school projects, offering advice on life choices, or simply listening when she needed to talk. Every interaction was tempered now by awareness, by a conscious effort to never let the closeness slip back into dangerous territory. Even as I maintained distance, there were moments that tested my resolve. Late nights spent helping with college, applications, car rides where we talked about her dreams and doubts, or quiet evenings where we worked side by side on a shared household task. The proximity, the laughter, the way she looked at me with trust and admiration, these things stirred memories I had long worked to suppress. I had to remind myself constantly that what had once been a fleeting forbidden spark was no longer possible. The boundaries were clearer, yet the emotional connection remained undeniable. I noticed subtle changes in myself. I became more reflective, more patient, and more aware of the responsibility inherent in every relationship. I learned to channel emotions that could have been destructive into care, guidance, and presence. My marriage, too, benefited from this self-awareness. I invested more deeply in my wife, communicating openly, planning shared experiences, and nurturing the love that had brought us together. The past affair of emotion, though never acted upon, served as a quiet teacher, reminding me that closeness with someone outside the marital bond must be approached with vigilance. Lily began to leave for college, and the distance brought relief and an unexpected freedom. Phone calls and video chats replaced the daily proximity, and the longing I had once felt for her presence was transformed into a quieter pride. I found that stepping back allowed me to appreciate the emotional bond in a healthier way, one of mentorship, care, and family connection rather than dangerous desire. Yet, even in the distance, memories lingered. Certain gestures, tones of voice, or phrases she used would evoke a memory of our closeness from years past. I learned to greet these moments with a controlled awareness, acknowledging the past without letting it shape my present. The lessons of restraint, of self-control, and of honoring boundaries became deeply ingrained in my identity, shaping how I interacted with all relationships thereafter. At the same time, I watched Lily flourish. She became independent, capable, and confident, and I felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that my guidance had helped her navigate challenges without overstepping. Every success she achieved reinforced the importance of channeling emotions into positive, responsible action rather than indulgence in fleeting, dangerous feelings. I had seen the consequences that a line crossed too far could bring, and I was determined not to repeat those mistakes. Family gatherings, holidays, and casual dinners became occasions of careful observation and joy. I could be present without overstepping, enjoy laughter without feeling the pull of forbidden closeness, and participate in her growth without compromising my integrity. The past intimacy that had once threatened to unravel everything had been transformed into a quiet, enduring sense of connection, one that was safe, appropriate, and yet deeply meaningful. Over the years, I reflected frequently on the lessons learned. Desire, even in its emotional or unspoken forms, can be powerful and consuming. But self-awareness, vigilance, and a commitment to ethical boundaries are essential to prevent harm. I had faced temptation, felt its thrill, and survived its pull, and in doing so, I gained a profound understanding of human emotion and the importance of restraint. Life continued its rhythm. I nurtured my marriage, strengthened friendships, and built a sense of personal fulfillment independent of the past. Emotional awareness became a cornerstone of my identity. I approached new relationships with honesty, clarity, and respect, understanding that intimacy carries responsibility, trust, and consequences. Every choice I made thereafter was informed by the lessons of that earlier closeness with Lily, the ways feelings can intensify, the ways boundaries must be maintained, and the ways care and guidance can replace temptation when handled wisely, even. Now, years later, when I think of Lily, it is with warmth, pride, and a sense of gratitude for the lessons learned. The memories of intensity, closeness, and temptation are no longer painful, nor are they sources of longing. They are reminders of human vulnerability, of the challenges inherent in blended families, and of the strength that comes from choosing integrity over desire. The story of those years has become part of the fabric of my life, quietly shaping who I am, how I love, and how I guide those I care about most. The experience taught me that emotional connections are powerful, that temptation can appear even in the most unexpected relationships, and that the careful cultivation of respect, boundaries, and ethical behavior is what ultimately allows love and trust to endure. In the end, the closeness I once feared would destroy everything became a source of insight, growth, and enduring wisdom, shaping my life in ways I could never have anticipated during those long, challenging days. As the years rolled on, the rhythms of life settled into a careful balance. Lily's independence grew, and with it, my role shifted from being a constant presence to a supportive, guiding hand in the background. I learned to take pride in the small victories, a good grade, a well-handled conflict, a choice made with integrity. Watching her navigate life without overstepping my own boundaries became a source of quiet satisfaction, a reminder that intimacy did not have to be dangerous to be meaningful. Even simple moments carried weight. I remembered the early mornings we had spent together preparing for school events, the quiet car rides discussing her ambitions, or the laughter shared over mundane household chores. Those memories remained vivid, tinged with an emotional intensity I could no longer act upon but could reflect upon with clarity. It was a constant exercise in restraint, to honor the closeness we had once shared, without allowing it to destabilize the ethical framework I had rebuilt for myself. Life demanded new responsibilities. My career progressed, friendships deepened, and family obligations expanded. The lessons from the past guided my interactions with colleagues and acquaintances, making me more empathetic, patient, and attuned to the subtleties of human emotion. I realized that desire, when unrestrained, could be consuming, but when acknowledged and managed, it could become a source of self-knowledge and emotional intelligence. Even as Lily's milestones passed her high school graduation, college acceptance, and eventual first steps into adulthood, I remained mindful of the delicate balance between pride and presence. Every celebration was tinged with a quiet awareness that the emotional intimacy we once flirted with could not recur. And yet, the foundation of trust we had built allowed her to flourish, confident that I was a steady and dependable figure in her life, someone whose support she could rely on without question. Occasionally, there were moments that tested my vigilance. A gesture, a glance, or a tone of voice would trigger a memory of the closeness that had once threatened to cross into dangerous territory. In those instances, I would step back, redirecting my attention to the present and reminding myself that the bond we shared was not meant to be a source of temptation, but of guidance. I found that the deeper my self-awareness became, the easier it was to channel emotions into constructive actions rather than forbidden desires. I also watched as Lily forged her own relationships, navigating the challenges of friendships, romantic connections, and personal growth. Observing her from a place of respect and care, rather than longing or emotional entanglement, brought a new kind of fulfillment. I could celebrate her successes, offer counsel, and share in her joys without feeling the pull of the past or the weight of inappropriate desire. The emotional intensity that had once consumed me was now a quiet, reflective awareness, a testament to restraint, growth, and the enduring strength of ethical boundaries. As adulthood approached for her, our conversations evolved. We spoke of ambition, dreams, setbacks, and resilience. The trust between us deepened in a healthy, sustainable way. I became a confidant, a mentor, and a stable presence in her life. And in those moments, I realized that the lessons learned from past temptation had shaped not only my own character, but also the environment I could provide for her. One grounded in integrity, empathy, and emotional honesty. Family life, too, benefited from these experiences. My marriage grew stronger as I invested more fully in communication, shared experiences, and mutual understanding. The mistakes of the past served as a constant reminder that love and desire, when unguarded, could threaten everything I valued. By cultivating patience, awareness, and ethical consistency, I was able to create a home environment that was safe, nurturing, and full of genuine connection. Even now, decades later, the memories of that night, the intensity, the temptation, the fleeting emotional closeness remain, but they exist not as a source of guilt or longing, but as a lens through which I view human emotion. Complex, powerful, and capable of teaching lessons that endure far beyond the moment. I reflect on them quietly, acknowledging the past without letting it dominate the present, aware that the experience shaped the way I relate to others, manage desire, and maintain trust. The years have taught me that human connections are rarely simple. Emotional bonds can stir feelings that are at once beautiful and perilous, and the measure of maturity is the ability to navigate those feelings with integrity. My relationship with Lily became a crucible for understanding the power of restraint, the importance of ethical boundaries, and the enduring impact of love expressed responsibly rather than impulsively. I have since embraced life fully, cultivating relationships, friendships, and professional connections with honesty and care. I have learned that desire, unchecked, can be destructive, but when acknowledged and transformed into guidance, mentorship, and meaningful support, it can become a force for growth. I continue to celebrate Lily's successes from a place of pride and respect, not longing, grateful that our bond endured in a form that was safe, constructive, and enriching, even in quiet moments, when the city hums softly outside the window, or when a familiar song drifts through the air. I sometimes recall the intensity of that past connection. The memories are vivid, yet tempered by years of reflection and self-discipline. They remind me that passion and temptation are human, but so too is the capacity for ethical choice, growth, and resilience. The story of that night and the years that followed is woven into the fabric of my life, not as a source of shame or desire, but as a reminder of the enduring power of boundaries, responsibility, and the complex beauty of human emotion.